Before we get into today's story, tell me in the comments which video you've enjoyed the most on this channel so far. I love hearing your feedback. Growing up, Max had always been the quintessential annoying older brother. Our parents married when I was 10 and he was 12, blending our families into a somewhat chaotic but ultimately loving unit. Sharing a room with him was just one of the many adjustments I had to make. We had the usual sibling dynamics, bickering over the bathroom, fighting for the last slice of pizza, and engaging in endless rounds of teasing that often teetered on the edge of annoyance. But beneath that, Max had matured in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. He carried himself with a newfound confidence and an easygoing charm that was both disarming and intriguing. It wasn't just his physical appearance, though. I couldn't deny the way his broad shoulders and tousled blonde hair had transformed him from a lanky teenager into a strikingly handsome young man. It was more than that. There was a depth to his gaze, a quiet intensity that made my heart skip a beat. At first I dismissed these feelings as a byproduct of spending more time together. But as the summer days unfolded, the tension between us grew palpable. One evening we were lounging in the living room watching a movie. Normally this would have been an opportunity for playful banter and sarcastic commentary. But tonight a comfortable silence settled between us. A silence that spoke volumes. I caught Max watching me, his gaze lingering a moment too long, sending a shiver down my spine. I laughed nervously, trying to break the tension, but the feeling that something had changed between us persisted. Then he spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "Do you ever think it's strange? Us living together like this?" I froze, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of nervousness. He paused, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. "I mean, we're not actually related," he said, stating the obvious. "We're step-siblings, but there is no blood connection between us." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. It was a fact I had always known, but hearing him say it aloud triggered a strange feeling within me, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to process his words, but before I could formulate a response, Max laughed, dismissing his own question. "Forget it." His voice regained its usual lightness. Just thinking out loud, I nodded relieved to let the subject drop, but his words echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended. The silence that followed was different, now charged with an awareness that had been absent before that night. As I lay in bed, my thoughts raced. Why had his words affected me so profoundly? Why did the simple fact of our non-biological relationship suddenly feel so significant the next morning? I hoped the awkwardness would have dissipated, but when morning replied casually, I could feel his eyes on me, which sent a shiver down my spine. The day passed in a haze of unspoken tension. We avoided unnecessary conversations, but the air crackled with an energy that was impossible to ignore. It was as if we were dancing around a fragile truth, afraid to acknowledge it, but unable to look away. By the evening, I was exhausted and drained by the emotional turmoil. I collapsed onto the sofa, unable to maintain the pretense any longer. Something had shifted between us, and I couldn't ignore it any longer that night. I stayed up late hoping Max would retire first, but as fate would have it, he had the same idea around midnight. I heard his footsteps padding down the hallway. He entered the living room and settled onto the sofa beside me, the cushions dipping under his weight. His presence felt closer than usual, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes held a glint of something more. I shrugged, feigning indifference. "Just not tired," I replied, my gaze fixed on the television screen, though I couldn't tell you what was playing. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin tingle. I was acutely aware of his proximity. The quiet intensified like the calm before a storm, and my thoughts raced, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. The undeniable pull I felt towards my stepbrother. Then Max's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. "I wasn't kidding the other day, Emily." His words hit me like a jolt of electricity, my heart leaping into my throat. "What?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I meant what I said. he continued, his gaze unwavering. About us. About this. He gestured vaguely between us, encompassing the unspoken tension that filled the room. We're not really related. We've lived together for years and shared our lives, our secrets. Don't you feel it too? His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken desire. My pulse quickened, my mind reeling. Every rational thought screamed at me to deny it, to shut him down, to run away. But instead I sat frozen, captivated by his gaze, the truth of his words echoing within me. I know you feel it too, he whispered, barely audible, but it resonated deep within my soul. The honesty in his voice startled me, not because I disagreed but because I didn't. The realization sent a shiver down my spine, a mixture of fear and excitement. No one would ever know, he added, his voice in a seductive murmur. His eyes searched mine, pleading for a response. I pulled back, overwhelmed by the implications of his words. I stood abruptly, my heart pounding in my chest. This is wrong, Max. We can't, I said, my voice trembling but firm. He rose as well, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a vulnerability I had never seen before. Why not? He asked, his voice laced with frustration and longing. No one would ever find out. I shook my head, my resolve strengthening. It doesn't matter, we're family. He remained silent for a moment, his gaze searching mine, a whirlwind of emotions swirling in their depths. Then with a sigh he nodded, taking a step back. Okay, he said, his voice resigned, but there was an undercurrent in his tone, a hint of defiance that told me this wasn't over. The following days were agonizing. The unspoken tension between us was palpable, casting a shadow over every interaction. I avoided him as much as possible, seeking refuge in my room or making excuses to leave the house. But even physical distance couldn't erase the turmoil within me. The memory of our conversation haunted me, replaying itself in my mind with relentless clarity. I berated myself for allowing the thought of a relationship with Max to take root, for the flicker of excitement I had felt at his words. Our parents were due back soon, and I clung to the hope that their return would restore some semblance of normalcy. But deep down I knew that the fragile balance between Max and me had been irrevocably disrupted. One night, as I lay in bed, the house enveloped in silence. A soft knock on my door startled me. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. Emily. Max's voice was a soft whisper. I froze, torn between the urge to ignore him and the overwhelming curiosity that gnawed at me. Slowly I sat up, my voice barely audible. Yes, can I come in? He asked. The storm that had been brewing between us was about to break, and I wasn't sure either of us was prepared for the consequences. The gentle knock on my door startled me. My heart pounded as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Finally, I opened the door to find Max standing there, his usual carefree demeanor replaced with a hesitant uncertainty. Emily, he began, his voice low and apologetic. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened the other night. I shouldn't have crossed a line. His apology should have brought relief and closure, but it didn't. The tension between us remained a palpable force that filled the space between us, and we can't go there anymore. Max, I said, firmly meeting his gaze. We're family, we can't. He nodded, running a hand through his tousled hair, his expression a mixture of frustration and resignation. I understand, he said, his voice was heavy with emotion, but I can't just turn off my feelings. His words struck a chord. Within me, echoing the turmoil in my own heart, there were no easy answers, no simple solutions to the complicated situation we found ourselves in. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken emotions pressing down on us. The next morning, Max announced his decision to leave for a while. Maybe some space will do us good, he said quietly, a hint of sadness in his voice. Give us time to figure things out. I knew he was right. The tension between us was suffocating, and distance was the only way to gain some clarity. But the thought of him leaving filled me with a strange emptiness. Nobody needs to know, Emily. He added, his voice barely above a whisper. These were his last words before he walked out the door, the sound of it closing echoing through the empty house like a final farewell. Something fundamental had shifted between us, something irreversible. A line had been drawn, a boundary established, but its clarity came at a cost. The bittersweet pang of what could have been in the days following Max's departure. The house felt strangely quiet. The tension that had permeated every room dissipated, replaced by an eerie stillness. I should have felt relieved, and part of me did, but his absence left a void, a lingering ache that I couldn't quite explain. I buried myself in my studies, desperate for a distraction from the emotional turmoil that continued to plague me. Hours were spent poring over textbooks and scribbling notes, but even the demands of academia couldn't fully erase the memories of Max's words, gaze, and presence. The bond we had shared, once rooted in sibling camaraderie, had blossomed into something more profound and complex. And now with distance I could finally admit the truth of my feelings without the constant pressure of his presence. It was a confusing, liberating, and heartbreaking realization. Weeks turned into months. I settled into a new routine, and the return of our parents restored a sense of normalcy to our household. The familiar rhythm of family life resumed, filling the void left by Max's absence, but in quiet moments. When the house was quiet and the world outside faded away, my thoughts inevitably drifted back to him. One evening, as I sat at my desk struggling to concentrate on an assignment, I heard a familiar voice in the hallway. Max's voice made my heart skip a beat, a wave of emotions washing over me. Excitement, anxiety, and a hint of trepidation. I froze, wondering if I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, clear and unmistakable. Emily, his voice was soft and hesitant. Taking a deep breath, I rose from my chair and walked towards the door. As I opened it, there he stood, bathed in the soft light of the hallway. He looked different, more relaxed, more at ease, but the familiar warmth in his eyes remained. "Hey," I said, trying to maintain a casual tone despite the rapid beating of my heart. "How was your trip?" "It was good," he replied with a genuine smile spreading across his face. A smile that made my stomach flutter. We stood there for a moment, the weight of our shared history and the uncertainty of our future hanging heavy in the air. I needed some time to clear my head, Emily, Max said softly, breaking the silence that stretched between us. The air was thick with unspoken words and lingering emotions. It felt like the distance had grown, but there was also a sense of understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that we were ready to face whatever lay ahead. Max's expression softened, and a tentative smile crossed his lips. "I've missed you," he admitted, his voice vulnerable in a way I had rarely heard. "Can we talk?" His simple request felt like a lifeline, an opportunity to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. It was a chance to rebuild the connection we had shared, to navigate the complexities of our relationship. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "Of course," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Max sat on the edge of my bed, his posture hesitant, while I settled on the floor facing him. "Emily," he fixed his gaze on the floor as he looked for the right words. "I don't want things to be awkward between us. I just want to be friends again like we were before, without all the tension, relief washing over me like a tidal wave." It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. "I'd like that too, Max," I said softly, my voice filled with sincerity. "I think we can find a way to go back to normal, to just be ourselves." He looked up, and for the first time since his return, I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Good," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "I value our friendship, Emily. I don't want to lose that." "Me neither," I admitted, my heart feeling lighter. "We've been through a lot together. It would be a shame to let this ruin everything." "Exactly," he said, his shoulders relaxing as the movie marathon reminiscent of the past would be ideal. I replied with a smile, then with a teasing glint in my eyes. I added that as long as it's not a cheesy rom-com. He laughed, the genuine and carefree, filling the room with a comforting warmth. "How about an action-packed thriller?" Instead, he suggested, and we fell into an easy conversation about our favorite films as the evening progressed. The initial awkwardness was replaced by the familiar rhythm of our banter and laughter. We teased each other relentlessly, reminisced about shared memories, and even argued playfully over the merits of different superheroes. It felt good to be around him again, to recapture the effortless connection we had once shared in the days that followed. Our friendship blossomed, and we spent hours playing video games, sharing music, and collaborating on school projects. It was refreshing to rediscover the joy of our connection, free from the undercurrent of tension that had once plagued us. Yet, there were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when I would catch Max's gaze lingering on me a moment too long, or when a casual touch would send a shiver down my spine. In those moments, the memory of what had almost transpired between us would resurface. A ghost of what could have been time. I would push those thoughts aside, reminding myself of our commitment to friendship. But no matter how hard I tried, those lingering glances and accidental touches remained a subtle reminder that while we had chosen to move forward as friends, the past still cast a shadow over our present. I tried to dismiss those lingering moments of tension, reminding myself that Max and I had chosen to move forward as friends. It was the right decision, the only logical path. Yet there were times when the past resurfaced, whispering doubts, tempting me with forbidden possibilities. One afternoon, while browsing through a magazine, I noticed a leather-bound journal lying open on the coffee table. Curious, I picked it up and began flipping through the pages, which were filled with Max's elegant handwriting, not with words but with intricate sketches. Each drawing was a masterpiece, capturing the essence of its subject with remarkable detail and emotion. "These are incredible, Max," I said, looking up at him surprised. He was sprawled on the sofa, engrossed in a novel. He looked up startled, a faint blush creeping onto his cheeks. "Oh, those are nothing," he mumbled, reaching for the journal. "Just some me doodles." I pulled it away playfully. "Don't be so modest. These are amazing. You're really talented," shrugged with a shy smile on his lips. "Thanks, Emily, it's just a hobby." As the months passed, our friendship deepened, and we became each other's confidants, sharing our hopes, dreams, and vulnerabilities. He was always available to listen, encourage, and make me laugh. The complexities of our past faded into the background, replaced by a bond that felt genuine and unbreakable. Occasionally, memories of those charged moments would resurface like ghosts from a forgotten dream, but I would push them aside, focusing on the present and the beautiful friendship we had cultivated. Looking at Max now, I saw more than just a stepbrother. He was my friend, my confidant, someone who had seen me at my best and worst and had never wavered in his support. There was a comfort in our connection, a sense of belonging that I had never felt before. But there was also summer approaching, promising long and carefree days filled with sunshine and laughter. The anticipation of freedom and adventure filled me with excitement. But beneath it all, a sense of uncertainty lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that our relationship was approaching a crossroads. One sunny afternoon, we decided to spend the day at the beach. The sun shimmered on the turquoise water, casting a golden glow on the white sand. We found a secluded spot and spread out a blanket under the shade of a palm tree. Max took out his sketchbook, his brow furrowed in concentration as he began to draw. I watched him, fascinated by the way his hand moved across the page, capturing the beauty of the scene with ease. "Grace, what are you thinking about?" I asked, curious about the inspiration behind his art. "Just trying to capture the moment." He responded softly and focused. "It's so peaceful here. I want to remember it. Don't forget to include me in your masterpiece." I teased, though my words held a hint of longing. I wanted to be more than just a subject in his art. I wanted to be a part of his world, a significant press in his life. He looked up, a playful smirk on his lips. "You're the muse, Emily," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "You might just inspire my greatest work." But his words sent shivers down my spine. The familiar tension returns. I quickly averted my gaze, laughing nervously, but as the afternoon unfolded, filled with easy conversation and shared laughter, that spark of something more was in the warmth of his gaze. The gentle touch of his hand, the way his voice softened when he spoke my name. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself I was imagining things, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder if he felt it too. If the forbidden attraction that had once threatened to consume us was rekindling beneath the surface of our newfound friendship. We laughed together, the sound light and carefree, a welcome respite from the weight of our shared history. It felt good to be back in this comfortable. I tried to push the thought away by focusing on the gentle breeze rustling through the palm trees and the rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore. But the question lingered as a persistent whisper in the back of my mind. What if we were brave enough to explore those feelings? What if we had taken a different path? Max, I began, my voice hesitant. Can I ask you something? He looked up from his sketchbook, his expression curious, of course. Emily, what's on your mind? I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, and finally the words tumbled out before I could stop them. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't decided to just be friends and had explored those feelings? His hand froze in mid-stroke. His pencil hovering over the page, he set it down slowly, his playful demeanor replaced by a thoughtful intensity that made my breath catch. Honestly, he said, his voice low and sincere, yes, I do sometimes wonder if we were just scared of what might happen if we let ourselves go. His admission washed over me like a tidal wave breaking down the carefully constructed walls I had built around my emotions. Hearing him say it aloud made it impossible to ignore the truth of me. I asked with a barely audible whisper. The question hung heavy in the air between us, charged with unspoken longing. Max's gaze drifted towards the horizon, his brow furrowed in thought. The sunlight glinted off his golden hair, highlighting the sharp angles of his face. I believe he could have said finally. His voice measured, but we made a choice. Emily and I respect that we are better friends now. I repeated, but the word felt hollow and devoid of conviction. A knot of uncertainty tightened in my chest even as I tried to convince myself that we had made the right decision. We spent the rest of the afternoon laughing, joking, and sharing stories, but beneath the surface, the weight of our conversation lingered. Every glance and every shared smile felt charged with unspoken meaning. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple, we packed our things, and the honesty in his voice and the flicker of longing in his eyes fueled the turmoil within me. I wanted to confront him and ask him how he truly felt, but fear held me back. I was terrified of shattering the fragile peace we had created. A few days later, when our parents announced a surprise. We're planning a family vacation to Hawaii next month, Mother said, her voice brimming with excitement. The prospect of a change of scenery filled me with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Perhaps the trip would provide the clarity we needed, a chance to escape the complexities of our relationship and rediscover the simple joy of friendship. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder if the close proximity, the shared experiences, would only intensify the forbidden attraction simmered beneath the surface. As I caught Max's eye across the breakfast table, I noticed a flicker of curiosity in his gaze, mirroring my own uncertainty. Perhaps this trip would be the catalyst that finally brought us together, or perhaps it would push us further apart. One thing was certain, Max and my story were far from over. We sat in comfortable silence, the crackling firelight dancing in our eyes, the unspoken emotions hanging heavy in the air. I squeezed Max's hand, a smile spreading across my face. Okay, I said, my voice firm and resolute, let's see where this goes. His answering grin, a mixture of relief and joy, warmed me from the inside out. In that moment we crossed a threshold, venturing into uncharted territory with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore seemed to echo our own beating hearts, a symphony of anticipation and hope. The remaining days of our vacation unfolded as a dream. The tension that had once plagued us disappeared, replaced by a newfound lightness and joy. We strolled hand in hand along the beach, laughing at the antics of playful dolphins and collecting seashells that shimmered like jewels in the sunlight. Nights were spent under a canopy of stars, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. Each conversation deepened our connection, solidifying the bond that had blossomed between us. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking array of colors, we found ourselves on a secluded stretch of beach. The gentle waves lapped at our feet, and the salty air carried a sense of peace and tranquility. Emily, Max begins his voice, earnest and sincere. Regardless of what happens, I want you to know that our friendship is the most important thing to me, and I would never do anything to jeopardize it. His words touched my heart, filling me with a warmth that spread throughout my entire being. I feel the same way, Max, I replied, meeting his gaze. I want to explore this, but let's take it slowly, one step at a time. A wide smile spread across his face, his eyes sparkling with happiness. That's a deal, he said softly. We'll enjoy the journey together. Our last night at the beach house was bittersweet. Max and I built a small bonfire on the sand, the flames casting dancing shadows against the backdrop of the moonlit ocean. We roasted marshmallows, their gooey sweetness a perfect contrast to the salty air. Laughter and quiet conversations mingled with the rhythmic sound of the waves, creating everything felt different, and I smiled, my heart swelling with affection. Yeah, but I think it's even better now that we've come so far. He leaned in closer. The firelight illuminated his handsome features. I'm grateful for every moment that left us here, he whispered. You mean everything to me, Emily. His words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. My breath hitched in my throat as I replied, You mean a lot to me too, Max. I never imagined we'd find this kind of connection. He gently took my hand, his fingers interlacing with mine. Let's promise to always be open and honest with each other, he said earnestly. I promise, I replied, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I want this to work, Max. The fire crackled, the stars twinkled overhead, and everything felt perfect in that moment. As summer faded into autumn, we returned to our daily routines, but the transformation in our relationship remained. The tentative bond we had once shared had blossomed into something deeper, something extraordinary. Weeks later, we found ourselves back at the beach, strolling along the familiar shoreline. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the sand and water, and Max turned to me. You're my greatest inspiration. I laughed, warmth spreading through me like wild. And you, I replied, are the artist who brings color to my world. As we walked hand in hand, waves lapping at our feet, I knew our story was just beginning. We had embarked on a journey filled with uncertainty, but also with the promise of love, laughter, and a connection that defies all expectations. What are your thoughts about Emily and Max's story? Have you ever had a relationship that challenged societal norms? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that explore the complexities of human connection.